Well, thank you for joining me today for TopAdmit's webinar on how to prepare for your MBA admissions interview. I'm Jason Skinner, General Manager of TopAdmit. I'm an MBA graduate myself of the McCombs School of Business at the University of Texas at Austin. And I'm very pleased now to be heading TopAdmit, which is the leading online platform to help college and grad school applicants get editing help and advice for their admissions, essays, and other materials. And as for you, the viewer right now, I should say congratulations for reaching this stage in your admissions process. You worked hard at school, planned out your work experience over the past few years, taken your GMAT, and submitted your essays to your dream school. And now you're anticipating an invitation to interview with a representative of the school. So good job. You're truly in the final stretch to reaching your dream of becoming an MBA student, and you want to be sure to get this right. Now, it's important to understand the place that the interview holds in the admissions process. In part, it's a continuation of what you've experienced while you were preparing your essays, demonstrating qualitatively what kind of a person you are beyond the quantitative scores like your GMAT and GPA. As with your essays, the admissions committee here wants to get a picture of your real nature beyond the numbers. But there's also another way of thinking about it as well. You can approach your interview prep right now as a little bit of on-the-job training to take your place as an actual MBA student. In addition to highlighting your strengths as a candidate, the MBA program will be assessing your ability to articulate your ideas succinctly so as to meaningfully address any business problem that you'll be challenged with during the course of the program. And so the MBA interview is not only a matter of getting past a final gatekeeper in your admissions process, it's also an important preview of what you will actually be experiencing as an MBA student. The best thing you can do right now is prepare and practice. So first comes the preparation. And here I like to quote the famous Chinese general Sun Tzu. If you can know yourself and know your opponent, you can be sure of winning every contest. Now, when I say know yourself, I mean it's important to review your resume, your personal statement, and other essays, and think back over your work and personal history to be ready for the questions that the admissions committee might ask. When I say know your opponent, in this case the school, it goes beyond simply rattling off the names of a couple of key classes and professors. If you have researched the school, visited with its representatives at events like the MBA Tour, and hopefully talked with some of its alumni, you will be able to show how this particular school can help you in your individual career goals and why you're a great fit for this program. And so to demonstrate how important it is to know both yourself and know the particulars of the program you'll be interviewing with, let's look at some very common MBA interview questions. Let me share a screen here. Are we seeing? Okay. Well, here are some of the commonly asked interview questions. Tell me about yourself. That's always a great opener for any interview. Why are you seeking an MBA now? Why are you interested in our program? Why do you feel you are a good candidate for our program? How have you shown leadership? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Do you have any questions about our program? You'll notice this is very similar to what you might expect in a job interview. And that's really one way to think of it. This is you were applying for and are a candidate for the next most important position in your career, which is a full-time MBA student. So looking at some of these questions specifically, tell me about yourself. Think of this if you were in Either you might be speaking with an alumnus in your city, or you might be speaking with the admissions director at the school, or you may be even talking over a video link, similar to what we're doing right now. Either way, though, the principles are the same. When somebody asks you to tell you about yourself, you should be very well prepared on how to answer this. Your answer should be no more than 2 or 3 minutes long, to talk briefly about your journey up to this point, why an MBA is important for you now, and where do you see yourself in the very near future. Your undergraduate education, why you chose your major, your work experience and accomplishments, and your career goals. You're not being asked directly what your plans are and what the MBA does at this point, but when you introduce yourself, there should be some implicit answers to those questions. Why are you seeking an MBA now? This is the crux of the issue. I found that very often the differentiator between successful and not successful MBA candidates is clarity on just why they want to be an MBA student and what this program will do in their life at this point. I've had some students who had a business failure, actually. They encountered some setback, and they had a realization that they needed more strategic vision, more quantitative preparation in order to achieve what they wanted to in their life. One way to think of this is, and sometimes this comes out as an explicit question in the interview, is where would I be without the MBA? What will I be doing 5 years from now if I don't do an MBA? And compare that with what the MBA should you anticipate it will do for you. That will be able to demonstrate to yourself and to the admissions director just what role this program will play for you. So either way, it needs to demonstrate that this MBA program will be a critical part of your career plan. Another thing is, why are you interested in our program? Whether you're interviewing for a job, interviewing for a school, or even if you're going on a date, why are you interested in me versus 1,000 other people or programs out there? How do you appreciate me as unique? That's always an important question, and that's where doing your homework comes in. Again, more than just scanning the website of the program, but getting an appreciation of not only what do they offer, but how is it pertinent to what they want to do, what you want to do. So listing the reasons for this, for why it's ideal, and if it's not just a matter of name dropping, if you can express an appreciation for a particular professor or program or track within the school, that shows that you've done your homework. And again, keep the answers brief. How have you shown leadership? Here is a very critical question, and this is getting straight to the role of an MBA. You are being viewed as a future leader. How have you played that role up to now? You can talk about either in your academic life, hopefully within your work life, or even your personal life, shown how you have led and persuaded others to improve some situation. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Sometimes there's a little bit of a interesting way this is framed. More frequently in job interviews, somebody might ask, what would your best friend say is your biggest weakness? Getting kind of an objective view or your perception of what other people might say your weaknesses are. And because this is a challenging question, and it can't only be a matter of us saying that, I work too hard or I study too hard. You want to show some sincerity and honesty and self-awareness while at the same time you're in the process of overcoming and addressing what you understand to be challenges that you need to address in your own life. And finally, and this is very often overlooked, do you have any questions about our program? Here's the key point where you can show that you have a sincere interest and you've done some homework on the program where you're applying. Now, I should mention right here that at this point that you are able to submit questions, you should see on the right hand of your screen there is a question box, a little chat box, and you can just go ahead and anything that comes to mind. I will be addressing this at the end of the session, and so just go ahead and anything which comes up that you feel that you'd like me to address. If I don't address it by the end of this session, then I will get to it at the end. So please go ahead and submit your questions if you can. And I have my own little control panel here. I can watch for questions as they arise. So, how do we actually address these questions when they come up? How do we actually prepare and understand what the interview process is going to be about? You can see the screen, right? Okay, I'm sharing the screen. Well, a common framework, a very common way, and this I think will be helpful for you not only in terms of the MBA, but also in your upcoming job interviews when you come to that point, is a principle called the behavioral interview. It's a very common framework both in academia and in the business world to understand, get a perspective on how a candidate, how a job applicant or MBA candidate will deal with situations in the future. It's called the behavioral interview or behavioral event interview technique, and it has this name because it helps the interview get a picture of what your future behavior will be like based on your past actions. Now, you can expect the interviewer to ask you very specific examples of your past actions. And it's for the purpose of illustrating how you will react in future situations, such as when you're called upon to show leadership. Tell me about it. This is your clue for when you're being asked a behavioral interview question. Tell me about a time. Tell me about a time you displayed influential leadership. Tell me about a time that you demonstrated that you could build relationships or express your drive and motivation for a project. Tell me about a time when you were frustrated and how you dealt with it. All of these things are talking about the past, and they will be very specific on a specific point in time and a specific situation. But always remember, you want to be positive and show how you've learned and dealt with situations successfully, because what you're really saying within the behavioral interview context is, how will I deal with these situations in the future? Now, there's some techniques for answering these things, and that's what we're going to get to here. How to prepare for a behavioral interview? Well, again, here, a lot of it comes down to doing your homework. You want to go know yourself very well. You can think about recent positive situations involving your work experience, your leadership, professional relationships, teamwork, planning, anything which, basically anything which you would like to highlight as contributing to yourself as a candidate. Now, what you want to do for each of those situations is prepare a short description of that situation and be ready to give details. Always be honest. Don't embellish, exaggerate, or give the appearance that you're hiding anything. And also be specific. When you're asked, tell me about a time that you displayed leadership, you want to say, for this particular project, with this particular goal, I did A, B, and C, rather than giving a broad range of across a year I handled many projects. It's much more powerful to dwell, and you'll probably be guided to talk about one specific event. So think about that in your preparation and have those specific stories ready. And finally, it's always powerful to use a storytelling technique, such as what we call the STAR approach, which is situation, task, action, result. We're going to talk about that in a moment. It's a way to convey very rich information in a very compact format because, again, you don't want to spend more than 2 minutes at most on any particular interview answer. And the technique that I'm going to describe will help you do that in a meaningful way. So we call that interviewing like a star. Again, situation, task, action, result. It's also something which I advise candidates to look at in their essay preparation. It's a powerful writing technique, but it actually originated in the professional world as a behavioral interviewing technique at the outset. And it's been very popular in the business world because it does convey a lot of information very candidly, about how a candidate will deal with situations based on their past experience. So I always say that it's all about telling a story. It's one thing for me to say I'm a leader, but you don't want to just say that. You want to tell it. You want to show an example of it. Whenever you're asked about your leadership skills, strengths, weaknesses, or challenges you faced, you'll make a much more powerful impression by telling a story. And furthermore, I would advise you to go through your own resume and practicing a story about every bullet point, if possible. Also, go through your admissions essays if you have other experience that you've mentioned there. Anything you might be challenged on any particular thing on your resume. Sometimes just to show, as a test to see that what you're presenting is really your background, but more importantly to show how these experiences have contributed to your own development. So why would that be? You might be challenged on some particular point, again, because it catches the interviewer's eye. But more importantly, it's beneficial to yourself. It will help you think on your feet for possibly unexpected questions. What's the most surprising workplace situation you encountered? Well, if you've reviewed your resume and you remember that one project where things went very oddly and there were some surprising developments, if you've done that personal review before you go into the interview, you'll be able to answer it just like that. And that shows that you're confident, and you'll feel much more confident in answering the interviewer's questions. And then build on that to come up with stories, hopefully, which are not included in the application materials. Show that you have a wealth of experience that can't necessarily be compacted into just one particular page. Always leave, as a storytelling technique, make your viewers, interviewers, or readers hungering to learn more about you. And as I say, the way that you can answer this in a very interesting and compact format is called the STAR system. Situation, task, action, result. Now, what do those words mean? Let's take a look. Situation. This is the setup of the story where you're giving the time and the place and the context. It could be a general setting, but also might include a broader challenge or conflict that you or your organization faced. For example, if I ask you the question of how have you led a team to meet a goal, well, you could say, as an example, and this is actually a real example from one of our past candidates' essays, and he also went on to use this in a face-to-face interview. The candidate said, last year, I volunteered to chair the donations committee of an annual literacy fundraiser for my company, where we faced a fundraising goal of $10,000. That answers the question, what was the situation that I or my team faced before I started taking action? And if there's a quantitative component, $10,000, that always helps it, that conveys urgency and gives it a kind of a realistic element. So that's the situation. The task. This illustrates your role in the story. It often takes the form of a goal, an objective statement, or an important decision that you had to resolve as a leader. And it's always important to highlight your collaboration with other people. You want to, being an MBA candidate is all about teamwork. But remember that also for the purposes of the essay or the interview, you are still the star of your own story. That's what the interviewer is interested in. For example, what did I do in that fundraiser? My main functions were to assign specific jobs to committee members, check on their progress, and help teammates make deadlines for obtaining donations. That gives me something really to hold on to about what was your role in this story. It answers the specific question of what challenge did I face given the situation that I just described. Situation, task. Now then, next comes the action, which is the heart of the story. Admissions officers want to know how you work in action. And you want to offer the highlights, don't get bogged down in too much detail. And it could be in a team context that always demonstrates leadership, how you work with others. But again, remember to show how your own actions made a contribution. For example, I motivated my team by having them meet literacy program children. I assigned tasks and checked in regularly and successfully mediated team disputes. I led the team to visit 20 restaurants and called 12 wineries, all while ensuring that deadlines were met. This is what I did to address the tasks I just outlined. Answers the questions, what actions did I take to resolve the situation, and task-wise, how did I advance? And finally, it's always important to have a result. You want to show that there were concrete results and that your actions made a difference. Here you've been asked by your interviewer, how did you lead a team to meet a goal? And so you want to show very specifically, answer, this is the goal that I helped my team meet. If the story you've chosen is ambiguous, muddled, or uncertain, then you may want to go back and reframe the situation or pick up another story to tell altogether. And this is where your preparation, your pre-interview preparation comes into play. Because a positive outcome and a happy ending will make your story much more powerful and establish you as a star, something that will really stick in your interviewer's memory as a confident and very confident person showing leadership qualities. And again, specific details count here. You should quantify your results if possible. The example that we had for our candidate a few years ago was my team convinced 10 restaurants, 3 wineries, and 20 other businesses to donate, directly helping to raise $15,000 for the organization and exceeding our fundraising goal by 50%. I love percentages too, because it shows progress toward the goal. It answers the question, what was the impact of my actions, and what was the final resolution of the dilemma going back to the beginning of the story, and it wraps it all up. So again, within 2 minutes, you can answer a question very succinctly, tell a little story, and have something which can convey your qualities powerfully to your interviewer. So the STAR technique, I'm a great fan of it. I think this is something I always like to mention as a way to answer both essay and interview questions. So wrapping it up, talking about points to remember about your interview. Interviewers do have different styles, but they'll always have the same goal, seeing how your character and behavior will fit in with their program. And even if a question focuses on a past event, for example, in behavioral interviewing, the goal is still to predict how you will act in the future, both within this program and beyond as you work toward your career goals. So the key is to know yourself, know your target program inside and out, do your homework. Know how to answer a question with a story while keeping it short. The STAR technique is a great way to do this. And finally, practice, practice, practice. The interview is a spoken exercise, and your practice sessions should be spoken out loud as well. Find a partner, find ideally another MBA candidate or aspirant. If you can find an alumnus of an MBA program, that would be ideal for real insights. And ask them to play the role of the interviewer and even give you some surprise questions to help you practice thinking on your feet. And finally, once you've done all of that and it comes the day of the interview, finally what you should do is relax. A clear mind and a confident manner will persuade your interviewer that you're a great candidate. And you should be confident because you've come this far, and if you can demonstrate that you've got the ability to meet this challenge, you've got an excellent chance of becoming a new MBA student in your target program. So that's the points I wanted to cover briefly today. And I'm opening up the questions right now. Okay, we have a question. We're still hearing me okay here? We have a question. Are interview questions very different across schools? Should we research past questions? And if so, what is the best way to do that? That's an excellent question. And yes, they are very different across schools, not only in terms of the questions themselves, but also the, let me share this, if I'm able to share it. That's an excellent question because, yes, they are different not only in terms of content, but also in terms of technique. Some programs will focus very much on the future, asking you specific questions about your career goals and what it is that you plan to achieve using this MBA program as a starting point. Others are, as I say, more indirect with the behavioral interviewing technique, where they will be asking you questions about specific things you've met, challenges you've met in the past. And the content of the questions, again, will vary from school to school. You can sometimes find information on that in message boards or on the school's website itself. Getting in contact with alumni or having a FaceTime with admissions reps through things like the MBA tour is also a great way to get insight on that. So yes, that is very worthwhile, and some of the ways that you can do that are what I just mentioned. Doing research online and getting FaceTime with people associated with the program if possible. Let me see if we have any other questions. What are some mistakes to avoid in the MBA interview? Now that's a great question because, again, this is something which gives your interviewer personal insight on not only your details of your background, but also how you react to situations. One of the things which I've frequently found, and this is partly a product of nervousness, is oftentimes there's a temptation to go on too long in answering a question. They call it hijacking the interview, like hijacking an airplane. You ask me a question about leadership, and I go on to a 10-minute discourse on my ideas and principles of what I think a leader should be. Listen very carefully. First of all, be relaxed and confident. Do your preparation and listen carefully to what the question, what's actually being asked. Whatever is being asked by your interviewer should be answered within 2 or 3 minutes at most. So don't go on at too long a length in your answers. Don't give very generic answers that show a lack of preparation. For example, what do you like about our school? Well, saying things which could apply to any MBA program. You want to, again, be specific and show that you did your homework. You especially don't want to be negative when you're talking about past employers or past colleagues in particular, because, again, your answers are a predictor for your future behavior. And you want to always come across as positive, as that you learn from your experiences and that you don't harbor any ill will, even if you feel that you've been treated unfairly. The interview is not the place to show it. Another thing to avoid in your MBA interview is, again, failing to listen or sometimes answering the question that you wish you'd been asked. And this is where thinking on your feet comes in, because if you have such great preparation for this one particular question, you might be asked. You need to be ready for unexpected occurrences. Let's put it that way. And when you do have a question which isn't what you expected, you need to be able to think on your feet. And going on at length and pretending that what your interviewer asked you is what you wish you'd been asked, that's always a sign of either lack of confidence or lack of preparation or both. And finally, when it comes time to ask questions, when your interviewer asks you, do you have any questions for me? Don't ask any questions which show a lack of preparation. Things that you could easily find by reading the website, or especially anything which is unprofessional or short-sighted. How much money am I going to be making after I get out of the school? Well, you could find those statistics, and ultimately it depends on you. So bear those things in mind when answering interview questions. Those are some things which you might want to avoid if possible. Let me see what else is there. Going back to the little question box. How can we know if the interviewers have read my whole application package or just my CV? Well, that brings up a good point, because there are different styles of interviews, and this is something which varies from school to school. Sometimes they will have you go into what they call a blind interview, where if I'm your admissions officer, or more likely maybe I'm a trained second-year student at the school or alumnus, I may not know anything about you, and they want a fresh perspective. And the admissions committee has asked me to talk to you with a fresh perspective, not knowing anything about you, or maybe only having your CV in front of me. Other times, I may be the admissions director, for example, and I've read your application thoroughly, especially if you've been invited to interview at the school. There's a good chance that you might be challenged on particular points in your application package. So be prepared for either one of those contingencies, but if you can, try to get some information ahead of time. That's always a good idea if it's available. Some schools ask alumni to do the interviews, so their questions can be much harder to predict. Any tips for this? Well, as an alumnus myself, I think one of the reasons that schools ask that is ask the alumni, well, partly it's a logistical issue. Sometimes alumni will talk to people in different cities who don't have a chance to fly into Cambridge or to New Haven or wherever it is. They may be located here in Asia, and so speaking to alumnus is the best option. Other times, though, I think these programs appreciate the ability to have the perspective of somebody who is experienced, who has taken their degree and gone out into the world, and be able to get an assessment of what this person may be like following in the same footsteps. So there's various reasons why they do that, and it's true that sometimes the questions are harder to predict. But again, if you know yourself very well, and if you know the details of the program where you're applying, then being a quick thinker will be your best ally in meeting the unexpected. Let me see here. Should I not tell the truth? I'm not going to say should I lie, but should I exaggerate or conceal or take credit for things which are not to my credit? I would be very careful about that, and I think this question is being asked rhetorically, I think, but you need to be aware that admissions committees, especially in recent years, take ethical concerns very seriously. And unfortunately, looking at students and applicants from Asia, very often unfairly, there may be situations where some students from some regions are looked at with more skepticism than others. So being honest, conveying that you're answering honestly is extremely important. And always remember that the interview that they have with you is not the only background checking that they're going to be doing. There's a good chance they'll be speaking with your referrers. I hope that the people who wrote your recommendation letter are very familiar with your background and they're prepared to take a phone call. That's a frequent occurrence. And at that time, they may be asked questions to corroborate what you may have said in your application or in your interview. So being honest, honesty is the best policy. I truly believe that. Some people say that using different stories in the interview versus those in your essay is a good idea. Is that true? Yes, it's a qualified yes. Again, showing that you have a rich background and not simply repeating the materials in your application package. That will give authenticity to your application. It will show that you've got a lot to offer. But you want to make sure that the stories you tell, the examples you cite in your application are pertinent, that they are things which answer the question. So really it depends on which story helps you the most. If you can draw on other areas of your experience, and sometimes I advise folks think about your personal life or your non-academic or non-professional life, if it helps show how you've been a leader or met a challenge. So those are things to consider, but it really is a very individually tailored thing that you want to look at your own background in answering that. Let me see. When it is my turn to ask questions, what kind of questions should I ask? Okay, we've talked about things you shouldn't ask, but what are some good ideas to talk about things which should be asked? And this is true not only for an academic program, but also for your future job. As a manager myself, I think our employees can attest that one of the most challenging parts of the interview is, do you have any questions for me? And again, this is a place to show your preparation and your interest. One thing I always think is, if you can't think of anything else, one good thing to ask an interviewer is, what do you think this campus culture, how is it set apart from others? What is it? What intangible things can I get from attending school on your campus versus other similar programs, and perhaps naming what those similar programs are? That shows that you've got a real interest and you're already thinking ahead to attending this school. What major changes do you see on the horizon for this program, especially in areas which where technological events are moving fast, such as marketing? If that's your area of interest, I think showing that you appreciate changes in the dynamism in your field, and asking how this program, asking in a respectful way, how this program will be keeping up with it and how it will prepare you. Those are good ideas. If you were in my position with my career goals, what would you say are your program's biggest advantages to me? If you could put, I phrased that a little bit clunky, but if you can say that, if you can kind of remember that you were also interviewing the school as well as the school interviewing you. And if you have done your homework and you are clear on your career goals, you can say, I have these goals and I understand what your program offers. What would you say in your own words, Mr. Admissions Officer, Ms. Alumnus, to somebody like me who has these goals? What advantages does your school have? That's a little tricky, but it is good to be bold. Remember, an MBA candidate is in training to be a leader, And if you can show that you know what you want and that you are seriously assessing this program to see how it will help you in attaining your goals, that's another good question to ask. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. How will the admissions committee view a career switcher, especially if it's between the application submission and the final decision date, if the career switch is in line with my post-MBA goal? Will the admissions committee be concerned about a bumpy career path? Okay, well, that is a common question. Sometimes it's not only between the admissions submission and date and decision date, but also possibly things which may have occurred in your past history. If you were at a certain position and you switched a career to something else. The important thing is, I always tell candidates, is to demonstrate that there's still a clear logic to what you're doing. If you have a passion, a certain passion, and you discover that, for example, I can talk about this personally. I was in the finance industry. I was an equity analyst for many years. And I found that I loved the writing aspect of it a lot, and I loved advising advising younger colleagues on how they can present their ideas and present their and make a persuasive case to fund managers on a certain investment case. I found that the coaching aspect of that was a lot of fun. I found that the writing was a lot of fun. And then I made, eventually, rather late in my life, I made a complete switch to a new field of education, edutech, we can say. And so outlining that there's a logic for the decisions you've made, and especially showing that you've had some consistency in what's driven you, or possibly if this has been part of your journey to discover yourself. That's also a narrative you can present. The only danger sign and the thing to avoid is saying if you're still in the process of not understanding what you yourself want. If between the time that you submitted your application and now you've switched careers, is that just because you decided you want to do something else, or was there something you identified in your previous job and you could do it even better in this job? That'll be great material to talk about in the interview. There'll be some fresh news that you can talk about when you are asked that initial question of "Tell me about yourself." So really, it comes down to how you examine yourself and how you play it. And those are my answers for those questions. I realize I've had my screen sharing all this time, so I must look very tiny. I think we have time for one more question. Oh, will the interviewer ask you if you were applying to any other schools? The answer is yes, probably. And if I am applying to a number of schools, including some safe schools, should I be completely honest about my answer? Well, again, the key is to always be positive. Everybody knows how the process works. And if you're applying to Harvard, Wharton, and USC, or whatever program, everybody knows what the rankings are. Everybody knows that some schools are more safety schools than others. You don't want to tell people that, of course. But if you can acknowledge that you were applying to a range of schools, and also show that there's some logical consistency, both among your higher ranked and not so higher ranked schools. They have similar features. They offer similar things which are beneficial to your career goals. Then I think the issue of whether it's a safety school or not is not going to be very important. The important thing, again, the question is all about you and showing what's important to you and how do you make decisions. So that's really the only significance of that question, is talking about what has been your decision-making process. And I wouldn't dwell on it a lot, but yes, they may ask if you've applied to other schools, what other schools those may be, but being positive and showing that you've got a clear rationale for the decisions you make, I think it should not be a problem. Well, I think that about wraps up what we have. Okay. Well, we're very happy to answer your questions. I can hang on for just another moment, or if you have any questions that you'd like to submit to us, you'll be receiving some post conference or post webinar emails that you can respond to. And we're always here at TopAdmit. Scoot out of the way, you can see us. TopAdmit is a leading service for helping candidates, not only with their essays and application advising, but we really have a passion for helping candidates and meeting their goals. And so please do, in the email is going to include my contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me if you think of any questions. And in the meantime, just what we've talked about how you can prepare for your interview. Just be confident, relax, and keep working hard. And I'm sure that we'll be hearing good news from you soon. All right, thank you for joining us. And I think that's what I can do to wrap up our webinar today.